Hey friends, welcome back to Food Prep Guide. Quick question. Have you ever opened your honey jar and found it completely crystallized solid? Or sliced an apple and watched it turn brown in like 30 seconds? Or tried to vacuum seal powdered foods and the vacuum just won't seal? Or maybe you've stored lettuce in the fridge only to find it slimy and gross 3 days later. Yeah, me too, and it's frustrating. But here's the thing, every single one of these problems and more has a super simple solution. So today we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to go rapid fire through 15 common kitchen problems and their solutions step by step. Let's jump right in with number one. So problem number one is crystallized honey that won't pour. So you open your honey jar, instead of smooth golden liquid, you're met with a crusty, crystallized mess that's impossible to get out. Maybe you've even thrown it away in the past thinking it was bad. I did that once and it breaks my heart thinking about all that wasted honey. But here's the thing, crystallized honey isn't bad. It's actually completely normal, especially for raw honey. But heating it incorrectly can destroy all those beneficial enzymes and nutrients that make raw honey so valuable. So here's the solution. Use your dehydrator as a gentle warming chamber. Remove all the trays and set your honey jars directly inside. Set the temperature to about 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's the key. This temperature is low enough to preserve all the beneficial properties while still decrystallizing the honey. Now here's where you need to know about timing. If your honey is completely solid, like mine was, like not just crystallized at the top, but all the way through, it's going to take around 5 hours. If it's only partially crystallized, you might be able to get away with 2 hours. So start checking at 2 hours, then add time as needed. One important note, if you buy honey in plastic containers, try to transfer it into glass jars first. You never want to heat plastic, so just cut the container open if possible, scoop the honey into mason jars, and then decrystallize. Another note is to try to always use wooden utensils when working with raw honey. I forgot during this demonstration and you just used a spoon. But the result is beautiful, flowing honey that's still raw and full of nutrients. Okay, problem number two, fruit that turns brown while you're dehydrating. You're excited to dehydrate apples, pears, all the things, but the moment you slice them, they start turning this unappetizing brown color. By the time they come out of the dehydrator, they look like something more you'd want to compost than eat. This is oxidation at work, and it happens fast, as in like less than a minute after cutting. The good news is it's completely preventable. You need an acid bath. So set up a large bowl with about a quart of cold water before you even start chopping your fruit. Now you have several options for your acid. So option number one is lemon juice. This is my go-to. You want to add about half a cup to a cup of lemon juice to your water, and as you chop your fruit, drop it straight into the bowl. Option number two is citric acid. Use about 1 teaspoon per quart of water, and this is what you find like in the canning aisle. It's like a white powder. Option number three is fruit juice, and here's where it gets kind of fun. You can soak apples and other fruits in something like pineapple juice or zucchini and pineapple juice to make it take on that flavor, like a mock pineapple, for example. The natural acidity prevents browning while adding interesting flavors. Option four is the spray method. If you prefer to load trays as you go, keep a spray bottle in the fridge with half water and then half either lemon or lime juice, and just spritz your fruit as you load it onto the trays. The fruit doesn't necessarily need to soak for a specific time. It just needs to sit in that acid water while you're prepping the rest of your batch. Once you're done chopping, load your trays and dehydrate. Your fruit will come out beautifully colored instead of brown and unappetizing. Okay, problem number three. You want to freeze broth instead of can it, but don't want freezer burn. So you've made a big batch of homemade broth or stock, and you want to freeze it for the next few months. But without a vacuum sealer, you're worried about freezer burn or the freezer taste that develops when air gets in. The typical solution people try is just pouring broth into bags and squeezing out air with their hands, but that still leaves a lot of air in there, and after a few months, the broth doesn't taste as fresh. So here's what to do instead. All you need is a large bowl of water and your freezer bags. This works for any liquid, by the way, broth, stock, soup bases, even sauces. Pour your broth into a gallon-sized freezer bag. I like to measure out 1 quart portions, just for recipe use. Now here's the trick. Zip the bag almost completely shut, but leave about an inch open at one corner. Now lower the bag slowly into your bowl of water. As you push it down, the water pressure will force all the air out through that small opening. Keep pushing until the water level reaches right up to that open corner. You want the bag completely submerged except for that tiny little opening. At the last second, seal that final corner. When you pull it out, you'll see the broth is pressed flat with virtually no air inside. It's not technically a vacuum seal, but it's as close as you're going to get without a vacuum sealer. Now lay these flat in your freezer. They will freeze into nice thin sheets that stack easily and thaw quickly. I've kept frozen broth this way for 3 to 4 months with absolutely no freezer burn or off flavors. Okay, problem number 4. You have no time for homemade bread. If you want to make homemade bread, but between work, kids, homeschool, life, everything else, who has time to be consistent with bread making on a regular basis? So we end up buying store-bought bread, even though we know homemade would be better and cheaper. The whole process just feels a little bit overwhelming when we're already so busy. So here's a solution. Meal prep your dry mix ahead of time. This master bread dough mix can make sandwich bread, pull-apart garlic bread, and Parmesan breadsticks all from the same base recipe. Here's what goes into each jar. 3 1/4 cup flour, 1½ teaspoons of salt, 2 tablespoons of sugar, and 2 tablespoons of whole milk powder. Mix that all together and you've got your base. You can prep 4 or 5 jars all at once while you have all of your ingredients out. When you're ready to bake, just add 1 1/4 cup warm water, 1½ tablespoons of oil, and 2 teaspoons of instant yeast. If you have a bread machine, it does all the kneading and baking for you. Just select the dough cycle. If you're kneading by hand, nothing changes about the recipe, just do the work yourself. The beauty of this system is that making bread becomes as simple as making a box mix, but it's wholesome ingredients. My 9-year-old can make bread with these jars. If you want breadsticks, add Italian seasoning and garlic powder to the base mix. Pull apart garlic bread, roll out the dough, spread some garlic butter on it, cut and arrange in a loaf pan. This is one make-ahead master mix with endless possibilities. Speaking of mixes and jars, we just released our Mix and Jars cookbook this week, and it's on sale for a few more days, depending on what time you're watching this video. If you want over 30 more recipes, just like this bread mix, everything from pancake mix to soup mixes to side dishes and desserts, comment the word bread in the comments, and I'll send you the link. Okay, back to our quick fixes. So problem number 5 is that lettuce goes bad in days. You buy beautiful lettuce from the store or harvest it fresh from your garden. You wash it, put it in the fridge, and within 3 to 5 days, it's soggy, slimy, and headed for the compost bin. It's frustrating and wasteful, especially when lettuce is so expensive or you've put all that work into growing it. Maybe you've tried just storing it in a bag or container, but the moisture makes everything rot quickly. Or you've let it dry completely, but then it gets a little bit bitter. The secret is paper towels and just the right amount of moisture. You want the leaves damp, but not wet. So first, wash your greens really well. I use a salad spinner for this. It's absolutely worth it getting all the greens mostly dry without removing all the moisture. You want them slightly damp, but not bone dry. Now grab some paper towels. I use some reusable bamboo ones since I do this often, but regular paper towels work fine. Lay your greens in a single layer on the towel. They can overlap. It doesn't have to be a single layer, but roll it up like you're making a sleeping bag for your lettuce. Do this with multiple bundles until all your greens are wrapped, and then place the rolls in gallon-sized zip-top bags. I use these thick reusable bags. And here's the important part. You're going to roll the air out of the bag as you zip it, getting it as airtight as possible. I have tested this extensively. Lettuce stored this way can last up to 6 weeks. 6 weeks! I did a test where I put a bag in the back of the fridge and forgot about it on purpose, and 6 weeks later, I made a salad. It was still crisp and fresh. This works for plenty of salad greens, lettuce, kale, arugula, spinach, you name it. And bonus, if you chop everything beforehand, it's basically meal prep. Everyone in your family can just grab a roll out of your bag and their salad is already chopped up. They just need to add their toppings. Okay, problem number 6. De-stemming herbs takes forever. You've got a bunch of parsley, cilantro, or basil that needs to be de-stemmed. So you start picking off leaves and 20 minutes later, you're only halfway through the batch and your fingers are cramping. Been there, done that. There's got to be a faster way, right? Well, thankfully there is. Just grab a fork from your silverware drawer, and that's it. That's the tool. Gather your herb stems so they're all facing the same direction. Make a little bundle. Hold the bundle firmly right at the base where the stems meet the first leaves. Place this on your cutting board. Now take your fork and position it at the stem end. Then just rake the fork forward, scraping down the length of the stems. The tines will strip off the leaves while the stems slide right through. You're left with a pile of leaves and a handful of mostly bare stems. Sure, there might be a few little small stem pieces mixed in, but nothing that's going to majorly affect your final dish. This works for parsley, cilantro, oregano, thyme, all sorts of things. Basically, any herb with that kind of growth pattern. What used to take 20 or 30 minutes can now take less than 5. One bundle, rake it with a fork, and you're done. Okay, problem number 7. Berries go moldy within days. You spend good money on blueberries, strawberries, or raspberries. You put them in the fridge, and within a few days, there's fuzzy white mold growing. It's wasteful and frustrating since berries are so expensive. The solution is food-grade hydrogen peroxide, not the drugstore kind with additives in the brown bottle. You need the food-grade version that breaks down into just water and oxygen. Here's the process. First, make sure you have a 3% food-grade hydrogen peroxide. If you bought a higher concentration, like a 12%, no worries, you just need to dilute it down first. For 12% peroxide, you're going to mix 1 part peroxide with 3 parts water. So in a quart jar, add 3 cups water and 1 cup of the 12% peroxide. Now you have a 3% solution, or just go ahead and buy the 3% solution and don't worry about it. For your berry soak, use a ratio of 1 part peroxide to 10 parts water. In practical terms, just fill a medium bowl about 3/4 full with clean water and then add about half a cup of your 3% peroxide. Then add your berries and soak for 2 minutes. Not much longer. The hydrogen peroxide needs just enough time to kill the surface bacteria and mold spores without affecting the berry structure. After 2 minutes, rinse with clean water, and here's the part that a lot of people tend to mess up. You need to dry them completely. Any remaining moisture will make berries go bad quickly, so let them air dry on a towel for at least 30 minutes. Then pat dry them gently with a clean towel. Once completely dry, store in a container that is again lined with paper towel to soak up any residual moisture. Stored this way, your berries can last up to 3 weeks in the fridge without any mold. The hydrogen peroxide killed invisible mold spores that were there waiting to bloom in your fridge. Okay, problem number 8. There are mysterious bubbles in your home canned foods. So you pull your jars out of the canner and see tiny bubbles through your spaghetti sauce, pizza sauce, applesauce. Maybe even 24 hours later, the bubbles are still there. So you start to panic. Bubbles can mean dangerous bacteria and fermentation, right? Well, yes, but that's not necessarily the case all the time. So ask yourself this one question. Did I use a blender, or like an immersion blender, a food processor, to make this product? If you did, those bubbles are almost certainly from aeration, not bacteria. When you blend thick liquids like spaghetti sauce or applesauce, you are essentially whipping air into the mixture. Those tiny pockets of air get trapped in the thick sauce, and even debubbling before canning doesn't get them all out. Here's how to know for sure if your jar is safe. Test number 1. Are the bubbles stationary? Look at your jar. The bubbles shouldn't be moving. If you give the jar a gentle shake, the bubbles should stay mostly where they are. Safe bubbles don't actively move. Test number 2, no fizzing. Watch the jar for a few minutes. There should be no upward fizzing movement towards the surface. The bubbles should basically be inert. Dangerous bubbles are the ones from like bad bacteria will actively move. They fizz upward. If you shake the jar, they rush to the top. When you open the jar, you hear this fizzy type of sound. That's fermentation, and that's dangerous. But stationary bubbles in thick sauces made with a blender can be completely normal and safe. This is so common that Ball and the National Center for Food Home Preservation have specifically addressed this. So before you panic and throw out a whole canning batch, check. Did you blend it? Are the bubbles stationary? If yes, you're fine as long as you canned the food properly and safely according to safe canning guidelines. Okay, problem number 9. You're not sure if your old yeast is still active. So you find a package of yeast in your pantry that's past its best by date. Maybe it's been open for a while, maybe it's been sitting there for even a year or even 2 years. You don't want to waste all your bread ingredients on dead yeast, but you also don't want to throw away yeast that might still be good. Most people just gamble, they use it and hope for the best, or they toss it and buy new, even if the old yeast was still perfectly usable. So here's the solution. Do a 10-minute activation test, but with a twist that many people don't know about. In a small bowl or a jar, combine a quarter cup of warm water. It should feel warm on your wrist like you're testing a baby bottle. 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast, or just 1 teaspoon if you're low on yeast. 1 teaspoon of sugar. You can lower that to half a teaspoon if you're using less yeast. Stir it all together. Mark a line on the jar showing the current water level and set a timer for 10 minutes. If your yeast is fresh and active, it should double in size within 10 minutes so that a quarter cup becomes half a cup, basically rising to twice the height of your mark. But here's what most people don't know. If it doesn't double in 10 minutes, don't give up yet. It doesn't mean failure. Old yeast can go dormant, kind of like sleeping. It's not dead, it just needs more time to wake up. So set your timer for another 10 minutes and check again at 20 minutes total. I tested yeast that was almost 4 years old and past its so-called expiration date. At 10 minutes, it had barely bubbled, and I thought, okay, I have to toss it. But I waited, and at 20 minutes, it had doubled and was very active, and that yeast made a perfect loaf of bread. If your yeast does work but takes 20 minutes instead of 10, just remember that when you make bread, let it proof longer. So for instance, if your recipe says to let it rise for 20 minutes, go ahead and increase that to 30 or 40 minutes. That's the only adjustment needed. Now, if there's absolutely no foam, no bubbles, even after 20 minutes, then yes, your yeast is dead. But you've only wasted a teaspoon of yeast instead of an entire batch of bread ingredients. One more tip, vacuum sealed yeast lasts much longer than yeast in an open jar. If you open a package, consider vacuum sealing what you don't use right away. Okay, problem number 10. Frozen herbs all clump together. So you freeze herbs for later use, but they freeze into one giant clump. When you need a tablespoon for soup or pasta sauce, you have to thaw the whole container or chisel off a chunk. It can be kind of messy. Some people try freezing herbs in ice cube trays with water, but then your herbs are kind of diluted and more prone to freezer burn. So here's a good idea. Make an herb puree cubes with olive oil and then flash freeze them. Start by washing and destemming your herbs, whatever kind of herb you have. Use that fork trick from earlier if that's helpful. Put a small amount of olive oil in your food processor or blender, just enough to coat the bottom. Add your herbs and blend, slowly drizzling in more olive oil through the top spout as it runs. You want just enough oil to create a smooth puree. You're not making pesto, so don't overdo the oil. The goal is just a really thick paste that is still primarily herb flavor, not oil flavor. And here's the key. Use silicone ice cube trays, the kind that kind of pop out. You want to spoon your herb puree into the tray. Each cube is roughly 1 tablespoon, which is great single-size serving for many recipes. Freeze them in the tray for 3 to 4 hours until solid. Once frozen, you can pop them out and transfer to a freezer bag. Now when you need basil for pasta sauce, parsley for soup, or cilantro for tacos, you just grab 1 or 2 cubes, no need to thaw the whole bunch, and no chiseling. This works excellent for the herbs that I've already mentioned, but really you can use it for any kind of herb that you would use in a cooked dish, and because you flash froze them individually, they won't stick together in the bag. I keep bags of several different herb cubes in my freezer, and cooking becomes so much faster when you can just toss in a cube instead of washing, chopping, and prepping fresh herbs every time. Okay, problem 11. You are cutting squash or zucchini, you look down, and oh my goodness, something crazy is happening with your hands. There's this weird film that won't wash off, your skin might have the yellowish stains, and it's peeling off in sheets like dried glue. You might even see some light redness or a rash-like appearance. You already washed with soap multiple times and it didn't help. You start wondering if you're having an allergic reaction or something is seriously wrong. But first, don't panic. This is called squash hands, and it's actually pretty normal for a lot of people, including myself. The residue from squash skin dries on your hands and creates this film. It's not an allergic reaction, more than likely. Obviously, I can't speak for everyone, but more than likely it's not. And it's temporary. It usually goes away in about 30 minutes to an hour on its own, but here's how to remove it immediately with oil. Soap doesn't work because the squash residue is dried on and the soap just kind of slides over it, but oil really breaks it down. So pour oil, just any kind that you have on hand. I almost always use olive oil. Coat your hands thoroughly, rubbing the oil over the affected areas. Make sure you get it everywhere the film is present, especially in between your fingers. Now take a scrubby sponge, the kind that has a rough side, and scrub your hands with the oil still on them. Press down firmly and scrub, and you will see that the peeling residue starts to come off immediately. Then rinse with warm water, and your hands should be back to normal. If they're not, repeat one more time. Some people are more sensitive to squash hands than others. If you know you're prone to it, you can prevent it by wearing gloves when processing squash. But if you forget or you don't mind dealing with it, just remember oil and a scrubby sponge. That's it. Okay, problem number 12. The breading falls off whenever you're frying vegetables. So you bread okra, squash, or zucchini for frying, but when you cook it, the coating falls off in chunks or just ends up soggy instead of crispy. All that prep work, and you end up with naked vegetables and a pan full of loose breading. Or maybe the breading stays on, but it's just kind of soggy and greasy instead of that perfect crispy crunch that you were hoping for. So here's the solution. It's a flour mixture, a buttermilk soak, and the proper freezing technique. So first, make your buttermilk alternative, or you can certainly use buttermilk, but we save money and make it ourselves with a temporary kind of buttermilk hack, which is for every cup of milk, add 1 tablespoon of vinegar. Shake it up and let it sit for 5 to 10 minutes. This creates a tangy buttermilk flavor and texture without having to buy buttermilk. While that sits, go ahead and make your flour mixture. For every 1 cup of flour, add 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 1 tablespoon of arrowroot powder or cornstarch, and then salt, pepper, garlic powder, and onion powder to taste. The baking powder helps the coating puff up. The arrowroot powder or cornstarch is crucial. It creates that crispy texture and prevents sogginess. Now chop your vegetables and soak them in the buttermilk mixture for a few minutes, then massage them into the flour mixture, making sure that everything is well coated. Now here's the part that can help prevent the breading from falling off. Flash freeze before cooking. Use a slotted spoon to shake off any excess flour and then lay your vegetables on a baking sheet in a single layer. They can touch but shouldn't overlap. Freeze for at least 3 to 4 hours until solid. Once frozen, you can transfer to a freezer bag. Now when you're ready to cook, you can take them straight from the freezer to the fryer or air fryer. Don't thaw them first. That's key. If you thaw first, they'll get mushy and the breading will slide off. But frozen breaded vegetables go straight into hot oil or the air fryer. The breading stays put and crisp up beautifully. This works excellently for okra, squash, and zucchini, or pretty much anything else you want to fry. Okay, problem number 13. Leftover rice is hard and clumpy. Maybe you made too much rice and saved the leftovers, but now it's rock hard around the edges, clumped together, and generally unappetizing. You're not sure how to bring it back to life without a microwave, or maybe your microwave makes it weirdly chewy, or maybe you're like me and you don't own a microwave. So here's a solution. Steam it on the stovetop. No microwave needed, and your rice will come out fluffy like it's freshly cooked. You need a pot with a lid and a strainer basket that fits inside. Add about 1/2 inch to 1 inch of water to the bottom of the pot. You don't need much. Place your strainer basket in the pot and add your rice. Use a spatula to break it up the clumps as much as you can, though it's probably going to be difficult at this stage. Put the lid on and turn the heat to medium. Don't start your timer just yet. Wait until the water at the bottom is actively bubbling. Once you see steam coming up and hear bubbling, that's when you start timing and set the timer for 3 minutes. After 3 minutes, remove it from the heat, transfer the rice to a bowl, and fluff with a fork. The steam has softened and separated the grains, and it should look and taste like fresh. This works for white rice, brown rice, jasmine, basmati, any type that you want. It also works for other grains like couscous and quinoa. Yes, it takes about 5 minutes total, which is longer than a microwave, but you're preserving the nutrients instead of zapping them. And honestly, 5 minutes isn't much when you're already cooking a meal anyway. Quick tip, if you're making fried rice, don't do this tip because cold, hard, leftover rice is perfect for fried rice. The dry texture absorbs the sauce better, and it doesn't get mushy, and it's great for fried rice. Okay, problem number 14. Canned foods sit unused in your pantry. So you do your inventory and find jars from last year that nobody's eating. Maybe it's that experimental recipe your family tried once and didn't love, or maybe it's something that worked for a while but then everybody got tired of it. You hate to waste all that work and those ingredients, but you also don't want to force your family to eat something they don't enjoy. And you kind of need those jars back for next year's canning season. So here's the solution. Repurpose it into a different form. Just because something is preserved one way doesn't mean it has to stay that way. Let me give you a real example from my pantry. I made zapplesauce. It's a zucchini mixed applesauce with apple juice, apple, cinnamon, and lemon juice. My kids loved it at first. They ate it for a few months and then got completely tired of it, and I still had 12 to 14 pints sitting there going into their second year. So here's what I did. I freeze dried it. You could also dehydrate it and turned it into a powder. When you remove the moisture, you concentrate the flavors, and now it tastes like a concentrated apple cinnamon powder. I use this powder to flavor oatmeal, yogurt, and muffins. It gets used constantly now, whereas the jars were just sitting there on my shelf. Another example, I had freeze-dried tomato slices that weren't getting used. Nobody thought to grab them for sandwiches because they were out of sight and out of mind. So I blended them into tomato powder, which we go through like crazy, constantly adding into soups and sauces and pasta dishes. Some other repurposing ideas, if you have a random jars of vegetables that aren't getting used, make a big batch of soup, dump them all in a pot with some tomato juice or some V8 juice, and then freeze it into individual sized portions. If you have fruits that aren't getting eaten, consider blending them and then dehydrating them and making a fruit leather or a fruit powder. The point is, there's no need to let food languish for years just because it's not working in its current form. Change the form and it just might be usable. Okay, problem number 15. Your powders will not vacuum seal right. For instance, maybe you've made tomato powder or bought powdered milk, flour, or any other powdered ingredient, and you want to vacuum seal it for long-term storage. But every time you try, the vacuum sealer won't seal properly. What's happening is the suction pulls the powder up into the rim of the lid, preventing a good seal. Here's a quick solution. Use a cupcake liner as a barrier, or you could also use a coffee filter. Take a standard cupcake liner and press it down into your mason jar. Press it down so that the rim of the cupcake liner is below the rim of the jar. What this does is create a barrier between your powder and the lid. Make sure your rim is clean and wipe it well before placing your lid. Now, when you vacuum seal, the suction pulls against the cupcake liner instead of pulling powder into the lid. The liner acts as a filter, blocking the powder but allowing air to escape. After sealing, do your tests. Listen for that high-pitched clink sound when you tap the lid. Feel the center. There should be no bump. It should be concave. And then try to lift the jar by the lid. It should hold. That's it. The cupcake liner stays inside the jar. It's food safe and doesn't affect your powder at all. When you open the jar for use, just remove it. This works for any powder that was giving you trouble. Tomato powder, fruit powders, powdered milk, flour, even spice blends. Like I said, coffee filters work too if you don't have cupcake liners, but I do find that cupcake liners are easier to work with because they're already the right size. Okay, there you have it, friends. These are the kind of quick fixes that make everyday cooking and food preservation just a little bit easier. Don't forget, if you want to access that Mix in Jars cookbook I mentioned, drop the word bread in the comments below and I'll send you the link. The sale ends in just a few days, depending on when you're watching this video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye!